Did you say you had confirmation on this?
That's affirmative. We have confirmation that 15 children have been shot.
You better establish about a level 3 on your disaster plan then.
It was a crime motivated by racism and hate.
Most of the rounds were fired there, fired this way at the school.
It ushered in a new era in America. This week's episode, one Purdy morning. Next. The Central Valley of California is a flat, elongated stretch of land about 450 miles long that runs from northeast to southeast down the center of the state. Often called the breadbasket of the world, it's thought to be mostly farms and agriculture, but there are many towns and cities here that are home to nearly 7 million people. Not a lot of money in these parts. Drug use is rampant and the homicide rate is off the charts. Here are some of their stories. This is Murder in the Central Valley. It's 10:40 a.m. on January 17, 1989. A 24-year-old man has packed his car and is leaving a sleazy Stockton hotel. In precisely 1 hour, he will commit a violent schoolyard shooting. One that will shock the world and send a ripple effect that's still felt to this day. With several firearms, an arsenal of ammunition, and fireworks, he heads out. So who is he? Let's rewind back to the 1960s. Tacoma, Washington, November 10, 1964. The boy is born to Kathleen Toscano and Army Staff Sergeant Patrick Benjamin Purdy. They named their new son Patrick Edward. 2 years later, his parents separated after his father threatened his mother with a weapon. Kathleen, baby Patrick, and siblings moved around for years. They moved to South Lake Tahoe and later to the Sacramento area. Eventually, they moved to Stockton, where Patrick attended Cleveland Elementary School from kindergarten through 2nd grade. Kathleen remarried 4 years later, but after being physically abused in front of little Patrick, she got divorced. Purdy was only 8 at the time. It was said that Pat was an overly quiet child who couldn't cope with things. His mother was more interested in schooling, working, and partying than raising a family. A year later, now living in the Bay Area, he and his siblings were taken into protective custody due to neglect charges. Their mother participated in a counseling program and the charges were dropped and the kids were returned. Before the age of 10, Pat was in an intense conflict with his mom. It came to a head in 1978 when, at age 13, Purdy struck his mother in the face. He was kicked out of the house for good. Patrick was a lonely boy that felt abandoned and rejected by his mother. Now homeless and living on the streets of San Francisco, he took to a life of crime to survive. He eventually was placed in foster care but didn't get the help he needed. He possibly suffered from schizophrenia and depression compounded by alcohol. He was a young man in serious trouble. At age 15, he was adopted and moved to West Hollywood. Here, he started using drugs. He went to high school, sporadically before finally dropping out altogether. Even he admitted he wasn't very smart. He had no skills to get a job, so in order to support his drug habit, Purdy started turning tricks. For a while he lived with an older man, but when that didn't work out, it was back to the streets to sell his body. In 1980, he was arrested for prostitution when he solicited an undercover police officer. This would be his first arrest, but certainly not the last. Adding to his despair, in 1981 his father was killed in a car accident in Lodi. He got an inheritance. Patrick accused his mother of taking the money his dad left him and purchasing a car and a trip to New York. Purdy moved up and down the country looking for work and committing crimes everywhere he went. His rap sheet was a mile long, mostly out of Los Angeles County. There he went by Patrick West. In 1982, he was arrested for possession of weed and dealing drugs. In 1983, he was arrested for possession of an illegal weapon and stolen property. In 1984, he spent 32 days in jail for being involved in an armed robbery in Yolo County. In 1986, when his mother wouldn't give him money for drugs, he vandalized her car. In 1987, Patrick spent time in jail after being arrested for firing a semi-automatic pistol at trees in the El Dorado National Forest. He was carrying a book about the white supremacist group Aryan Nations. While in custody, he tried to commit suicide twice. Once by trying to hang himself using strips of his shirt, and another time by using his fingernails to cut his wrists. The fact he couldn't even do that right added insult to injury. Later on that year, he took welding classes at San Joaquin Delta College. There, he complained about the high population of Southeast Asians attending classes. 1988 was a busy year for Purdy. He got a job at a small machine shop in Stockton for the first part of the year. Employees there said he was a big ball of frustration and always angry. Later, he moved to Portland with his aunt and her husband and became a boilermaker. It was here in Oregon, on August 3rd, he bought an Orico 56s and a K-47 style assault rifle. He loved firearms and had been collecting pistols all these years. He was such a burden with his problems that his aunt kicked him out, and in October he started drifting. Patrick traveled to Nevada, Texas, Florida, Connecticut, South Carolina, and Tennessee searching for work. Along the way, he would call his aunt and uncle collect. He called them quite often as these people were really the only family he had. The collect calls were costing them a fortune, and his aunt told him to stop calling. This hurt Patrick deeply. Now he was totally alone. No friends, no family, no job, addicted to drugs and alcohol. He returned to California, where he rented a room at the El Rancho Motel in Stockton on December 26th. On January 3, 1989, Purdy put on camouflaged clothing and went into a Stockton bar. He told the bartender that he was going deer hunting and had an AK-47 and a Russian-made pistol. The bartender told him that an AK would not be a good hunting rifle. Patrick said he liked the rapid-fire action, and then held his hands out to demonstrate how he would fire the weapon in a spraying motion. He was complaining about the Asians getting compensation from the government. While leaving, he said, "You're going to read about me in the papers." One morning, Purdy was seen watching the children in the playground at Cleveland School, and a few times in the evening, he was seen watching Lincoln High School while Cambodians were attending night classes. It's assumed he was trying to find the most Asians, with the easiest access. This was a few weeks before his attack. This brings us back to the morning of January 17th. Purdy, psychopath, loner, drifter, soon gets his revenge on society. He pulls his station wagon up to the back of the school on Stadium Drive at 11:40 a.m. He gets out wearing a flak jacket with a shirt underneath that had Satan written in pen on it. He puts his 9mm pistol in his waistband, grabs his AK-47, 5 boxes of ammunition, a 75-round drum, and 2 30-round magazines. It was recess time at the school, so there were a few hundred children out playing. It was go time. Patrick lights his car on fire. It was loaded with fireworks so as to cause a diversion. He makes his way towards the playground. Without a word or expression on his face, he holds his AK waist level and starts to spray the children with bullets. Just then his car explodes. Children scattered. Some fell dead where they were standing. He continued to shoot. He fired off 106 rounds into minutes. As soon as he started to hear sirens, he pulled his pistol out of his waistband, held it to his head, and pulled the trigger, blowing off half his head. His reign of terror was over. But for the victims and the community, it had just started. In all, 5 children between the ages of 6 and 9 were dead. 27 other children were wounded along with 2 teachers. On his jacket, Purdy had written things like PLO, Libya, Earthman, Freedom, and Death to the Great Satan, One can only assume he meant Satan. He had also drawn an American flag with a slash through it. He scratched the word Hezbollah into the stock of his rifle. When investigating the aftermath, police learned that Purdy had a half-brother. A few days before the massacre, the two were oiling Patrick's guns and talking about killing people. There may have been plans for him to join also, but he decided not to. When he was tracked down and arrested, he had the same kind of fireworks that Patrick had and a MAC-10 pistol owned by Patrick. Across town at his hotel room, he left an army of little toy soldiers staged all over the room and bathroom. Back at the school, janitors spent the night spackling over 60 bullet holes and cleaning up puddles of blood. School was held the next day, but only 1/4 of the students showed up. The events at Cleveland School sparked a gun debate that continues to this day. Patrick Purdy is buried in Lodi, next to his father. Their headstone reads, "Father and Son, may they rest in peace." And life goes on, but nobody will forget that one Purdy morning.